She ran for hours, you won't believe why, scary. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks as I laced up my running shoes. Havenwood was beautiful this time of year, a tapestry of reds, oranges, and yellows painting the hillsides. Perfect for a long run. Mark, bleary-eyed as always before his morning shift, mumbled something about being careful and shuffled back inside. He never really understood my need to lose myself in the woods, but he supported it nonetheless. My usual route started on the paved road leading out of town, eventually turning onto a dirt trail that snaked deep into the forest. I'd run this path hundreds of times. Every twist, every fallen log, every familiar landmark was etched in my mind. It was my sanctuary, a place to escape the anxieties that gnawed at me in everyday life. The first mile passed without incident. The rhythmic thump of my feet, the steady rise and fall of my breath, the rustling of leaves underfoot, all familiar and comforting. But as I veered off the road and onto the trail, a subtle shift occurred. It started with a feeling, a prickling on the back of my neck as if I were being watched. I glanced around but saw nothing but trees, probably just my imagination fueled by too much coffee. Then came the sound. A faint whisper, carried on the wind, just barely audible above the rustling leaves. I couldn't make out any words, just a low, murmuring sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I slowed my pace, straining to listen. The sound faded, then returned, closer this time. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me. I pressed on, trying to ignore the growing unease. But the whispers persisted, swirling around me like a phantom chorus. And then I started seeing things. Fleeting glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, dark shapes flitting between the trees. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. I knew this trail like the back of my hand. Yet today, it felt different. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper, the air colder. The familiar landmark seemed slightly off. A fallen tree that I always used as a marker was gone. A small stream that I usually hopped over had widened, its water black and sluggish. After about an hour, I came to Eleanor's cabin. It was a small, ramshackle structure nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by overgrown bushes and a tangle of vines. Eleanor was an elderly woman who lived alone in the cabin, a recluse with a reputation for being eccentric. I'd passed her place many times, sometimes stopping for a brief chat. She always seemed to know things she shouldn't. Today, she was sitting on her porch, rocking back and forth in an old wooden chair. As I approached, she looked up, her eyes unnervingly bright and clear for someone her age fixed on me. "You shouldn't be out here today, child," she said, her voice raspy. "The woods are restless." I chuckled nervously. "Just getting my run in, Eleanor. Everything okay?" She shook her head slowly. "They're hungry today, the shadows. They're always hungry, but today they're close." "Shadows?" I asked, forcing a smile. "What shadows?" "The shadows of those who have been lost, those who have been taken. They linger here, trapped between worlds, and they're looking for company." I shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor's words were unsettling, but I chalked it up to her being a bit out there. "Thanks for the warning, Eleanor," I said, "but I think I'll be okay." "Don't say I didn't warn you," she replied, her eyes never leaving mine. I continued on my run, Eleanor's words echoing in my mind. I tried to dismiss them as the ramblings of an old woman, but the feeling of unease lingered. The whispers were getting louder now, more distinct. I could almost make out words, but they were jumbled and nonsensical, like fragments of a forgotten language. And the visions, they were becoming more frequent, more vivid. I saw flashes of faces in the trees, pale, gaunt faces with hollow eyes. I saw figures lurking in the shadows just beyond the edge of my vision. I tried to focus on my breathing, on the rhythm of my feet, on anything to distract me from the growing sense of dread. I decided to turn back. This wasn't fun anymore. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I reached for my phone to call Mark, but there was no signal, of course. I hadn't had signal this far out in years. Panic started to set in. I picked up my pace, trying to retrace my steps. But the trail, it wasn't the same. It twisted and turned in ways I didn't remember. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling voice that seemed to be coming from inside my own head. It spoke my name, a drawn-out, mournful whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Sarah," I screamed, a primal scream of fear and desperation. I ran faster, my heart pounding in my chest, my lungs burning. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out of the woods. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it, a figure standing in the shadows just behind the trees. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by the darkness, but I could see its eyes, two glowing red points that burned into my soul. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. I ran as I had never run before, driven by a primal fear that stripped away all rational thought. I stumbled over roots, crashed through bushes, ignored the stinging nettles that whipped against my legs. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from that thing. The figure was gaining on me. I could hear its footsteps behind me, a soft padding sound that seemed to defy the laws of physics. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, cold and foul. I ran for what felt like hours, my body screaming in protest, my mind teetering on the brink of madness. The landscape around me became increasingly distorted. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes, the shadows danced and writhed, the air crackled with an unnatural energy. At one point I came across a clearing I didn't recognize. In the center stood an old, gnarled oak tree. Hanging from its branches were objects, glinting faintly in the dappled sunlight. As I got closer, I realized what they were: personal items. A child's shoe, a woman's scarf, a man's wallet. Things reported missing, the missing people. The whispers intensified. "Join us, Sarah, join us." I stumbled back, horrified. This was a trap. I had to get out. I kept running. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw it. A break in the trees, a sliver of light. I burst through the trees and found myself on a highway miles away from where I had started. I stumbled onto the road, waving frantically. A car screeched to a halt. A woman rolled down the window, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I collapsed against the car, gasping for breath. "Please, you have to get me out of here." The woman drove me to the nearest police station. I told them everything about the whispers, the visions, the figure in the woods. The detective, a grizzled man named Reynolds, listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "We've had a few missing persons reports in the area lately," he said, "but nothing like what you're describing." He took my statement, promising to investigate, but I could tell he thought I was crazy, or maybe just suffering from exhaustion and dehydration. Mark met me at the station, his face pale with worry. He hugged me tightly, telling me how relieved he was that I was safe. I tried to explain what had happened, but he just shook his head, attributing it to stress and lack of sleep. "Just rest, Sarah," he said. "Everything will be okay." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that it was all just a hallucination, a product of my overactive imagination, but deep down I knew the truth. I went home, showered, and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The house felt cold, empty, wrong. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. As I was brushing my teeth, I looked in the mirror, and that's when I saw it. A faint reflection behind me, just barely visible in the mirror's surface. A pair of glowing red eyes. It smiled. It was ready to play.